In the depths of the Texas jail system, there was a guy who defied the stringent laws and made the guards, who were previously fearsome, appear like children. He was a smart genius who had managed to escape from prison not once, not twice, but a staggering 4 times in a row. Over the course of less than 5 years, each escape was more intricate and brilliant than the one that came before it. However, the most recent escape in particular was going to break through all barriers and elevate the whole tale to a new level. It was so exceptional that some people may describe it as out of this world. You could assume it was a screenplay for a strange movie, but our narrative is a combination of intelligence planning and suspense. Our story starts in the early 1990s with a guy called Stephen J. Russell. At that time, Stephen did not have any criminal record. Stephen's life took a drastic change when his boss wrongly dismissed him. This occurrence left him feeling tremendously furious and helpless. He had a record and worked as an accountant for a firm. His life was tranquil, and he did not have any problems. Disappointed, particularly since he had committed himself to his profession and spent the most of his time on it, Stephen's outlook on life underwent a full transformation as a result of this experience. He went from being a law-abiding and calm individual to a person who entirely altered his view on life. Stephen, who was recognized for his intellect, was transformed into a person who was filled with wrath and resentment for the system. This transformation sparked a fire inside him, propelling him along a path that would permanently alter his destiny. At dealing with people and social circumstances, therefore, he made the decision to utilize this knowledge to become a fraudster. His adventure started with small-scale fraud operations targeting insurance companies, and he would stage accidents, some of which were fraudulent, maybe potentially harmful, in order to collect insurance money. Nevertheless, in 1992, one of his fraudulent activities was discovered, and they were able to hunt him down and detain him by the authorities. Following his arrest, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Stephen was sentenced to months in jail for the exposed fraud. Nevertheless, he had no intention of spending the complete time in prison. He immediately started formulating an escape plan to execute only 1 month after entering the prison. During this month, Stephen attentively monitored the situation. He studied the guards and workers inside the jail, analyzing their routines and motions, and he devised a simple approach to trick the guards and make his way out of the prison. Stephen saw that there were workers who periodically entered the prison, the jail, to carry out certain duties, and when they left, they simply went to the guards' room, banged on the glass, and the guards opened the door for them, allowing them to leave easily. What differentiated these workers from others was that they wore uniforms. Stephen came to the realization that these personnel were not permanent employees of the jail, but rather people who arrived occasionally to carry out their jobs and then went. They wore civilian clothing rather than prison gear, and they carried handheld radios. So, he struck a deal with someone to bring in civilian clothing and a portable radio for him to use with these materials. Stephen would use these items to blend in with the staff in the jail while pretending to examine various things while communicating on the radio. The radio, after some time had passed, Stephen went up to the guards' room and sent them a covert signal from behind the glass, indicating that he wanted to be released from jail. The guards then unlocked the entrance to the prison, and Stephen emerged once again as a free man after this remarkable escape. He created a new name and took refuge in the state of Florida, where he remained a fugitive for 2 years. Stephen moved to the state of Florida, 1991 until 1994 and beyond. Stephen's luck ran out during a daring heist that included forging insurance checks. He was trapped by relentless detectives, and he was arrested once again. Because of the unforeseen turns that destiny had in store for him, he was taken into custody once more. As the facts began to unravel, exposing that Stephen was an escaped prisoner, he found himself back in the center of the judicial maelstrom. He was transferred back to Houston, Texas, with the intention of escaping from the prison. After an ongoing cycle of evasion and capture, he made a choice that would change the course of his life. This time he chose to spend his sentence in jail, particularly since the remaining term was less than a year. However, after finishing his sentence and upon his release, he made a decision that would change his life forever. Later, he got a job as a lowly grocery store clerk, but it was not enough to satisfy his need for something more meaningful. He wanted to embrace a life of luxury and fortune, and with steely resolve, he designed a new path for himself. Stephen, who had previously been involved in a world of small-scale fraud, set his eyes on a more ambitious plan that promised him tremendous money and security. He hoped to mastermind a huge fraud operation that would ensure his financial freedom. His attention was drawn to an advertising in the newspaper, which offered him the possibility of playing a vital part in the future. Indefinitely, after a little period of time, the ideal opportunity was about to reveal itself. The issue was that he did not possess any qualifications or any job experience in this industry whatsoever, despite the fact that he was the financial manager of one of the most prominent health insurance businesses in the United States. However, this was not something that he was concerned about. Would prevent him from doing so, the first thing he did was to fabricate his biography by inflating it with great degrees and credentials, and even past experience working for a variety of insurance firms. This was the first move he took, only the first step. Following that, Stephen realized that he needed to get acquainted with the intellectual aspects of the job, and he proceeded to buy a few financial periodicals, such as the Wall Street Journal, as well as numerous books on the subject. Stephen had a keen mind and remarkable absorption abilities. He was able to swiftly acquire the material and all of the necessary details, and he became well educated in the language and terminology of the financial management industry. When he came for the interview, everything went well. His impressive credentials and eloquence readily persuaded them that he was the ideal candidate for the position, since he was the perfect match for the job. Following the conclusion of the interview, they immediately asked the names and phone numbers of organizations with whom he had previously worked in order to inquire about his work and performance. Stephen voluntarily supplied them with 3 references, all of which were positive. Were numbers that were linked to a call forwarding service, and whenever someone phoned those numbers, the call would be forwarded to Stephen, who would answer it personally. Stephen was able to answer each call in a competent manner, assuming a variety of personalities to do so. His voice seamlessly transformed, taking on new tones, accents, and even personalities with each interaction. He weaved a tapestry of plaudits and commendations deeper. His voice was able to suit the manufactured identities of his alleged references. The naive callers had no reason to dispute the genuineness of their conversations, which helped to strengthen the image of his excellent reputation. However, they were unaware that they were only pawns in Stephen's game. Sophisticated game of deception. When the firm gladly listened to the plaudits poured upon him, they inadvertently sealed their destiny. Stephen, the crafty opportunist, had successfully worked his way into a position of power and influence inside. The corporation was laying the groundwork for his magnificent plan to be carried out, but unfortunately for him, a dumb action exposed him. He made the error of refinancing his property in order to get a cheaper interest rate, and the employee at the bank noted this mistake. While tracking the money, it went back to the healthcare insurance firm where Stephen is employed. He was perplexed by the enormous quantities of money that were pouring through his account and questioned where this individual was getting such big sums of money. Following the dissemination of the information to the chief executive officer of the firm, along with other top executives, they proceeded to investigate their financial records and uncovered the questionable actions that Stephen had arranged inside the company in the form of transfers. As the inquiry progressed, the dark truth became readily apparent. They rapidly became aware of the fact that he was a previous criminal who was still on parole. The news spread like wildfire, eventually reaching the ears of the district attorney's office. In a matter of seconds, but before anarchy could envelop them all, Stephen felt the approaching danger and instantly made an effort to leave. He was successful in withdrawing almost $40,000 from a number of automated teller machines. Despite the fact that his accounts were blocked, Stephen, who was motivated by pure desperation, dared to undertake a hazardous action. He felt that he had the chance to sneak back into the safety of his house and grab some of his expensive items. Little did he know that the police were one step ahead of him and that they had been patiently waiting for his return at his apartment. As he neared his threshold, he was startled by them, and he was captured once again. He was plunged back into the depths of confinement for the second time, and this time the bond for release was extravagant, amounting to $950,000. It seems impossible for him to get such a sum of money after all of his accounts had been settled. Stephen was frozen, but he refused to accept his fate. He had no intention of being incarcerated, and within a little over 2 months after his arrest, he started carrying out an audacious and unusual escape plan. Within the confines of the prison walls, Stephen took advantage of a present chance and contacted the number for the Harris County Records Office, which is located in the same county in which he was incarcerated. The individual who answered his call was a female employee who was working for the Harris County Records Office. At the office, without hesitation or a shred of doubt, he confidently claimed to be Judge Charles Ham, the same judge who had ruled over his case like a master manipulator. Stephen spun a story of intrigue disclosing a startling twist telling her that he has a prisoner under his authority by the name of Stephen Russell, and that they had a secret appeal session, which resulted in a stunning change of events. The parole bail had previously said during a meeting on prior occasions. The enormous amount of $950,000 has been severely lowered to a measly $45,000. The initial astonishment of the office employee started to break under the weight of Stephen's unflinching assurance each and every time. Every word he spoke resounded with a mysterious air of significance, which caused her to doubt her own judgment. In order to complete the illusion, he deftly disclosed specific case facts, drawing a compelling portrayal of the mysterious individual. In the end, the court ordered the employee who was unaware of the situation to reduce Stephen's parole bond from $950,000 to $45,000. Stephen was now in a race against time to get the money. Stephen planned a plan to contact a prisoner finance firm, despite the fact that he was aware that any suspicious movement may attract the attention of the authority, which led to the collapse of the scheme. He was aware that any suspicious movement could capture the notice of the authority. Despite the fact that their terms did not normally apply to him, he was able to persuade them to pay his bail. He achieved this by bending their own regulations and setting specific criteria on convicts who were aiming to fail the authorities in Harris County, Texas. Soon after, they were aware of Stephen's ploy. It didn't take long for them to figure it out. Only 5 days after his escape, they did so. Unfortunately for Stephen, the authorities and detectives had him under continual watch, monitoring his cause. As a result of these discussions that were overheard, they were able to locate his whereabouts. They found out that he had come to Florida, and they narrowed down their search until they learned that he was staying at one of the beachside hotels in West. The ensuing trial that he underwent resulted in his being sentenced to 40 years in jail for both embezzlement and his escape in reality. Palm Beach, Florida was the location where they pounced, catching him off guard and detaining him once again. It was possible for him to get a punishment that was less severe, but he instantly admitted his guilt and accepted the judgment without appealing it. Even the prosecution was surprised by his speedy acceptance of the penalty, which was more severe than the one that was handed down. Even before the trial started, Stephen knew that he would escape again regardless of the conditions. However, this time, they did not send him to Harris County Jail. Stephen's punishment was fairly harsh, and it was obvious that he did not want to serve the length of his term. As an alternative, they sent him to a maximum security jail in the state of Texas. The authorities and officials at the jail were told about Stephen's deception and probable efforts to trick them, and they were required to maintain a vigilant watch on him. But the prison's alleged impenetrability and increased security led them to assume that everything was under control and that it would be impossible for him to escape again on the other side, Stephen stated during his contemplation of the situation. While he was watching and coming up with his new plan, he observed that there was a medical wing inside the jail. All of the physicians and nurses working in this wing wore green and blue scrubs, which were completely different from the scrubs that he had seen in the past. With the exception of the hue, Stephen, the prison guard, considered how he might turn his own garments into the same shade of green. When the difficult process was finally over, he made the decision to carry out his plan during the early morning hours of Friday. December 13th, 1996 was the date. In the beginning, he donned the green garments that had just been colored, and then he wore the white prison uniform on top of that. After that, he went ahead and had an early meal at 4 in the morning. When he finished his meal, he went to a quiet area inside the jail, where he changed out of his white prison uniform and began wearing just green clothing that were very similar to the clothes that medical personnel wore. This was identical to his earlier escape, which he walked out of. Stephen approached the guards area with self-assurance. He had been observing this area for a considerable amount of time and had noted that the female guard spent the whole morning chatting on the phone without paying attention to her surroundings. He approached the guard with unflinching confidence, greeting her from behind the glass, and suddenly convinced her to click the button and open the prison door for him. Stephen was able to become a free man once again. Nevertheless, he was also aware that he needed to leave the jail. Moving swiftly, before his escape was detected, he made the decision to contact someone and convince them to give him a ride in order to go as far away from the region as possible. He knocked on the door of one of the houses in the neighborhood, homes that were located along the road, and came across the homeowner. He claimed to be a physician who worked at the jail. He informed the homeowner that he had drunk an excessive amount of alcohol, smashed his automobile, and did not want the police to take him into custody. Jail officials to discover that he sought a trip with the intention of returning to his home anyway. The guy consented to grant the ride, and Stephen arrived at the adjacent town, where he quickly hired a cab and notified the taxi driver that he was going to return home. Stephen, who works as a surgeon at the Texas hospital facility in Houston, had been contacted for an urgent situation that required him to be sent there as quickly as possible. Once he arrived at the hospital facility, he instructed the cab driver to wait for him to bring the money to his hospital locker in order to pay him, but Stephen left and never came back, and as a result, Stephen was able to successfully make his third escape, leaving the authorities once again dumbfounded. They were so desperate to bring him to justice that they made the decision to send a special agent after him. The name of this special agent was Terry Capps, and Terry was the commander of the Special Operations Team inside the prison administration. Stephen's escape from jail was a successful escape. Terry was ready to restore his organization's name and catch Stephen once again. He knew all too well about Stephen's abilities in deceit, and he was resolved to apprehend Stephen once again. Their high-security facility for the third time was a great insult to them. Terry organized a dedicated task team with a singular focus on Stephen, and their first search led them to the town of Hansville, which is located close to the jail. Terry's actions made it evident that arresting him would not be a simple assignment. Its surrounds, nevertheless. Stephen was nowhere near the location. As previously indicated, he hired a cab and proceeded to Houston, finally abandoning the whole state of Texas and moved to Mississippi. Particularly, he made his way to the city of Biloxi, since it provided him with the chance to gamble and earn some money. Terry and his crew were working furiously to locate him, and they were successful in identifying a person who had been in touch with Stephen in the past. Recent days, and ultimately, they disclosed that he is in Biloxi, Mississippi. Immediately, Terry contacted the marshal or sheriff of the city, and he sent them pictures of Stephen. Surprisingly, Stephen's detention did not affect the outcome of the investigation. Take a moment to picture that out of all the locations in the city and all the individuals he might have met, the marshal himself happened to come across him on the street by coincidence. He recognized him from the photo that Terry had supplied him. Suddenly, he found himself face to face with the marshal who was carrying his photo. Despite this, he was captured for the third time and transported back to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice to serve his term once again and be punished. This time, they added an additional 5 years to his sentence, bringing the entire length of his sentence to 45 years. There is no prospect of parole, and the earliest that he might possibly earn release would be after a minimum of 11 years of imprisonment. This time, the monitoring on him would be strong, making it practically difficult for him to escape. Nonetheless, Stephen came up with a plan to escape this time. Needless to say, Stephen was aware of the fact that it was impossible for him to settle until he discovered a new means to escape. Insane escape plan. In every sense of the term, this plan would not only demand trust, but also enormous work. Even came up with this idea after examining the criteria for parole and discovered a possibility to fulfill the requirements for parole. Gap, he discovered, was a unique system that allowed release to criminals suffering from chronic and severe diseases. So he decided to mislead them and make them think that he was sick with AIDS. Of course, this was an exceedingly risky move on his part. It was a challenging endeavor that would need a great deal of work, unlike anything he had ever done before. The first phase was for him to starve himself for a period of many months, and then he had to motivate himself to throw up. As he pretended to have a number of symptoms, he was also required to fake medical records. He was successful in bribing a member of the staff to fabricate his records, which gave the impression that he was suffering from AIDS. At this point, the symptoms of AIDS were obvious to both him and the medical records. This also suggested that he was suffering from the sickness. He pretended to be bedridden and sick for a period of 8 months. During this time, none of the physicians working in the correctional facility considered doing another examination since they were persuaded by the medical records and the first findings. Diagnostic. Stephen's ultimate objective was to persuade them that he was on the approach of death in order to get parole for him and transfer him to an outside care facility. The next step was the most challenging of all the steps. In order to persuade them that the sickness had progressed to its last stage and that he was dying, he had to throw himself into a coma, which was perilous during the whole process. Stephen gathered the sedative pills that they had given him for the procedure. After many days, he took an excessive amount of these pills, which caused him to lose consciousness and go into a coma for a period of 4 days. After all of the misery that Stephen had endured, the physicians in the jail were confident that he had only a few weeks left to live or die. Later, they granted his request for release and sent him to a care facility in the city of Kennedy, which is situated in the state of Texas. However, this time Stephen made the decision to devise a scheme in order to evade their pursuit. For all time, he made the decision to stage his own death. He contacted the authorities at the jail, as well as the officials at the care center, claiming to be a physician by the name of Adam Roos. He said that he was an expert in the field of AIDS and that he had an experimental. He was interested in receiving treatment for the sickness and wanted to know if there were any convicts who were affected and could participate in the treatment trial. Stephen was the ideal candidate for the project, receiving clearance from both the jail and the care institution. They assume that someone from his family or relatives will be the one to bring him home when he is discharged from the care center. Center Stephen has made arrangements for himself to physically transport himself to the doctor. In a devious maneuver, Stephen was able to create his own death certificate and sign it with the name of Dr. Adam Ruiz, the exact Doctor Who had taken his identity. He then mailed copies of the falsified certificate to the care center, the jail, and the hospital. Stephen successfully escaped from jail for the fourth time in a manner that was both ideal and unusual. Finally, he got free, and no one was seeking for him. This was the officer responsible for parole release. In this way, nobody would go looking for him. For him, after a few weeks, he recovered his vigor and vitality. But contrary to expectations, he went back to his old habits of deceit and manipulation. This time, he needed to fabricate an identification card for a lawyer, and regrettably, he opted to use his own fraudulent identification credentials. Despite the fact that he had extraordinary intellect in the wrong manner once again, he went into a printing shop and requested the proprietor to make a card that was similar to those used by lawyers. The proprietor had some reservations about him, but he nevertheless supported him and provided him with the product. The owner of the printing company had a feeling that something was amiss, so he decided to call the police in Houston and alert him of what had occurred. In addition, he provided a copy of the card that he had prepared for the customer. Stephen grabbed the card and left the printing shop. Stephen to the authorities, when the officer viewed the image, he had a strong feeling of likeness to the fugitive. Stephen immediately phoned Terry. Terry was taken aback when he received the news, as he had assumed that Stephen was the person who had been missing. Despite the fact that he was still serving his 45-year term in jail, he instantly sought out to the prison administration, who told him that Stephen had been diagnosed with AIDS a year earlier and that his health had deteriorated, which ultimately led to his release on parole. Stephen passed away outside the jail after suffering from the sickness. Terry couldn't believe that Stephen had managed to pull off another breakout and escape promptly. Terry immediately gathered a fresh squad to hunt down Stephen and arrest him a few weeks later. Stephen went to a bank in Dallas, professing to be a billionaire and seeking to get a loan of $75,000 after he had faked his death. However, the vice president of the bank became skeptical of his narrative and requested him to pay back the loan. Stephen knew that something was about to go wrong, so he decided to deflect their attention by pretending to have a stroke and called for an ambulance. He waited while he went inside to phone the FBI and report him. Stephen had a feeling that something was going to go awry, left the premises in a hurry. Nevertheless, after the complaint was filed, he was held under surveillance in a hospital room until the FBI came to investigate his case. Nevertheless, Stephen once again utilized his cunning and self-confidence from his hospital bed to escape the situation. He phoned the administration of the hospital while pretending to be an FBI agent and told them that he was going to be discharged. He said that the investigation had been completed and that he was no longer under suspicion after some time had passed. The hospital administration notified the FBI that they had gotten a call from the FBI asking them to release Stephen. The FBI agents were startled since they had never made such a call before. The only thing that remained of Stephen's things was his body. Terry and his crew quickly mobilized in the city and began looking for him in nearby hotels, where they found that he had stayed. The driver's license that he was using had his picture on it, which confirmed that he was in Dallas. During the course of their inquiry, Terry and his team would question a variety of sources until they reached an insurance firm. It seemed that Stephen had been staying in a number of different hotels and that he was continuously traveling from one to another. Touch with them and planned to defraud them by sending false papers by fax. This information enabled them to narrow down the search by tracking the fax number, which revealed that Stephen was the person they were looking for. Situated in a particular section of the city, Terry made a request for help to the local police department in the region in order to aid in the search and to set up an ambush for Stephen while he was using the fax machine. Terry was aware that Stephen would be there, likely use it again to send new papers to the insurance company with the intention of deceiving them once more. He thought that Stephen would use the same fax machine, but the plan took an unexpected turn when two investigators arrived at the scene. We unexpectedly discovered Stephen strolling on the street just before they were able to carry out the ambush, and we quickly caught him. This resulted in Stephen being taken into jail for the 4th time, and after the big event, he was released. As a result of the humiliation that he had caused the authorities in Texas, they made the decision to make an example of him by giving him hefty punishments. To begin, he was given a sentence of 144 years in jail with no possibility of release. Despite the fact that Stephen's offenses did not include any acts of violence, he was subsequently sent to the maximum security unit, which is normally designated for the most dangerous murders and criminals. In this unit, convicts spend 23 hours a day spent in solitary confinement, with just 1 hour allotted for physical activity and personal care. Cleanliness, all of which is subject to close monitoring. To this day, Stephen continues to be present in the same high-security cell in which he has been held. Ever since 1998, he has been serving his sentence, and so we have arrived at the conclusion of our tale. I hope you found the tale humorous. Just in case you liked the video, don't forget to. To subscribe to the channel, click the like button. Click the bell symbol to access the channel as well. Get alerts when new videos are uploaded.